Most apocalyptic warnings feel distant, focusing on a far-off future, but Islamic history records a literal face-to-face encounter with the ultimate deceiver, and it happened 14 centuries ago. The man who survived to tell the tale was Tamim al-Dari. He was a wealthy merchant from Palestine and a literate Christian priest. His background made him an outsider to the early Muslims in Arabia, giving him the precise perspective of an objective observer. The ordeal began on the open water. Tamim and 30 men from the Luq and Judhem tribes were sailing a traditional dhow when severe winds blew them drastically off their intended course. For a full month they were trapped in a violent storm. The waves battered their small wooden vessel relentlessly until they finally washed up on the shores of an uncharted island, just as the sun was setting. They had no coordinates and no map. This maritime disaster had physically ripped these sailors out of the known world and dropped them directly into a metaphysical nightmare. As soon as the men disembarked, they were confronted by a bizarre creature. It was so heavily covered in thick, coarse hair that the terrified sailors couldn't even tell its front from its back. They asked the beast what it was. It replied in clear Arabic, calling itself al-Jassasa, which translates to the spy. It wasn't there to hunt them, it was there to gather intelligence. When they pressed it for more answers, the creature refused. Instead, it pointed them toward a nearby monastery, telling the men that someone inside was eagerly waiting for news from the outside world. The sailors sprinted toward the stone structure. They were convinced they had been lured into a devil's trap, running entirely on pure adrenaline and terror. If a supernatural beast was merely operating as an obedient scout, the figure waiting inside that monastery was a force of far greater consequence. Inside the monastery, they found a giant. He was a man of massive, intimidating proportions, securely bound with his hands tied to his neck and heavy iron shackles locking his knees to his ankles. But the prisoner didn't act like a captive. He aggressively interrogated them about 3 locations in the Levant. First, he prophesied a complete collapse of Bison's agricultural output. Next, he declared Lake Tiberias would eventually plunge and dry up entirely. He asked a third, similar question about the spring of Zugar. The prisoner wasn't measuring his confinement in days or years. He was tracking his impending release against the measurable ecological degradation of the Middle East. Then, the giant abruptly pivoted from geography to religion. He asked if the unlettered prophet, a specific term for a messenger who could neither read nor write, had emerged in Arabia, and if the local tribes had submitted to him. Tamim confirmed that Prophet Muhammad had indeed been victorious. The giant's response was shocking. He told the Christian sailors that humanity was better off obeying this new prophet. With that admission, the giant finally revealed his own identity. He stated clearly that he was the Masih al-Dajjal, the false Messiah, or the Islamic Antichrist. The Dajjal then outlined the terms of his future release. He claimed he would soon be permitted to travel the entire earth in 40 days, but would be physically barred by sword-wielding angels from entering 2 sanctuaries, Mecca and Medina. In this monastery, the personification of lies was forced to confirm the truth of Muhammad's mission to a group of shipwrecked travelers. Tamim realized that this physical encounter perfectly aligned with the prophecies he knew from his own scriptural studies. He managed to escape the island, traveled to Medina in the 9th year after the Hijrah, and formally converted to Islam. When Prophet Muhammad heard this story, his reaction was immediate. He summoned the entire city for an emergency assembly at the mosque. Sitting on the pulpit, the Prophet smiled. He explained to the anxious congregation that he had gathered them because Tamim's eyewitness account matched exactly with the divine revelations he had been preaching for years. The Prophet struck the wooden pulpit with his staff, declaring, "This is Taiba." He repeated the name of the city 3 times, identifying Medina as the very sanctuary the prisoner had been forbidden from entering. This assembly served as a public validation. The Prophet utilized the independent account of a new convert to provide his followers with a physical link to the prophecies he had previously shared. Before concluding the sermon, the Prophet explicitly pointed his hand toward the east. He anchored the mythic location of the chain giant away from the Mediterranean and toward a real-world geographic direction. This specific account operates as a theological bridge. It connects the ghaib, a term for the unseen, spiritual world, directly to observable, physical reality. That is why, even in the modern era, contemporary Muslims closely monitor the fluctuating water levels of Lake Tiberias. The prophecies made by the chain giant serve as a live environmental metric. Tamim al-Dari's story strips the apocalypse of its vague, abstract fears. It turns the end of times into a ticking, measurable reality, leaving the ultimate test of human faith waiting quietly in the East.